Rule number 1 at Blackwood Tower: never look the CEO in the eye. Rule number 2: never enter the 95th floor after midnight. Elizabeth knew the rules. She was just the night shift gardener, a ghost moving through the marble halls when the city was asleep. But tonight, she was about to break every single rule. A work order had come through marked urgent. The rare peace lily in the penthouse was dying, and to Elizabeth, a life was a life, even if it belonged to a monster. The elevator doors opened onto the forbidden zone. The air up here was different. It smelled of ozone, expensive leather, and cold isolation. The office was cavernous, walled entirely by glass that offered a godlike view of New York City. She thought she was alone. She moved toward the dying plant in the corner, whispering soft words to its wilting leaves, her hands moving with practiced tenderness. Then a sound shattered the silence. Crash! It was the sharp crack of crystal hitting a wall. Elizabeth spun around, heart hammering against her ribs. In the shadows of the room, a figure stood up. Mason Blackwood, the Phantom of Wall Street. He stood in a patch of moonlight, tall, broad, and radiating a dangerous tension. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the shattered glass on the floor, his chest heaving as if he were battling demons that money couldn't exorcise. I gave specific instructions. His voice was a low growl, rough with whiskey and exhaustion. No interruptions. Elizabeth knew she should run. That was the instinct. Never engage the beast. But then she saw it. His right hand was gripping the back of the chair, and it was bleeding. Dark drops of blood fell steadily onto the pristine Persian rug, a stark red violation of the perfect room. He looked at her then, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, expecting her to scramble away in fear. But Elizabeth didn't run. Her instinct to nurture overrode her instinct to survive. "You are bleeding," she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact. Mason blinked, seemingly stunned that she was still there. He glanced at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. "It doesn't matter," he scoffed, turning away to stare out the window. "Leave. Send the cleaning crew in the morning." Elizabeth set down her watering can. "The cleaning crew can't clean a wound. Mr. Blackwood." Mason turned back slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded. "Yes," Elizabeth said, stepping closer and crossing the invisible barrier between the help and the master. "You are Mason Blackwood, and right now you are making a mess of your rug." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a clean, white handkerchief. She walked up to the billionaire everyone feared, the man who could destroy her livelihood with a snap of his fingers, and she reached out. "May I?" she asked. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a strange electricity. Mason stared at her. He was used to people wanting his money or fearing his temper. He had never, in his entire adult life, encountered someone who simply wanted to stop him from bleeding. He stood frozen, paralyzed by the audacity of her kindness. Elizabeth took his hesitation as permission. She gently took his large, calloused hand in hers. Her skin was warm, roughened by soil and work. His was cold, smooth and tense. As she wrapped the cloth around the cut, stemming the flow of blood, Mason felt a jolt go through his arm, a sudden warmth that invaded the fortress he had built around his heart. He looked down at her, smelling the faint scent of jasmine and rain. For a second, the crushing weight of his isolation lifted, replaced by a terrifying confusion. Who was this woman? And why wasn't she afraid? Elizabeth finished the knot and looked up, meeting his gaze. In that moment, surrounded by the cold glass of the tower, a connection was forged. She hadn't just bandaged a cut, she had touched the untouchable. And as Mason looked into her compassionate eyes, he realized with a dawn of dread that his walls, for the first time in years, had just been breached. For 3 nights, Elizabeth waited for the termination notice. In Mason Blackwood's world, witnesses to vulnerability were usually silenced. But her security badge still blinked green. When the elevator doors slid open on the fourth night, the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. Mason was at his desk, bathed in the blue glow of his screens. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened. It was a state of undress that felt scandalously intimate in the corporate sanctuary. It survived. Mason's voice cut through the quiet. He spun his chair around, looking at the peace lily she had nursed back to health. "Plants are resilient, Mr. Blackwood," Elizabeth replied, her skin prickling under his gaze. "They just need to know someone is paying attention." Mason stood up. He walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. The scent of him, expensive scotch and cold city air, washed over her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, cream-colored envelope. "For your services," he said, his voice stiff. "And for your discretion." Elizabeth looked at the envelope. She knew it was a check. A large one. Money as a wall. She didn't take it. "I didn't help you for money," she said, her voice steady. "And I don't charge for kindness. It devalues the currency." Mason froze. He looked baffled, as if she were speaking a dead language. He slowly lowered his hand. "Then why did you do it?" he whispered, stepping into her personal space. "Why touch the monster?" Elizabeth met his stormy eyes. "Because you were bleeding," she answered simply. "And monsters don't bleed." The air between them crackled. In that moment, the billionaire and the gardener were just two lonely people standing in a tower. "I hate this room," Mason confessed suddenly. The admission tore out of him. "It's a glass cage. Everyone looks up, wanting to be here. But up here, there is no air." He reached out, his hand moving slowly toward her face. He wanted to touch her, to verify she was real. Elizabeth held her breath. But just as his fingers were inches away, a sound shattered the moment. Ding! The elevator chime rang out, sharp and intrusive. Mason flinched, pulling his hand back as if burned. The spell was broken. The door slid open, and a woman stepped out. Vanessa! Tall, blonde, and carved from ice. She didn't even look at Elizabeth. She walked straight to Mason, placing a leather portfolio on his desk. "The Tokyo merger is stalling. Mason, my father is furious." Then she turned, looking at Elizabeth with mild distaste. "Why is the cleaning staff still here? It's nearly 3 a.m. It's unprofessional." Elizabeth felt the sting of the dismissal. She looked at Mason, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for the man who had just confessed his loneliness. But Mason didn't look at Elizabeth. He looked at Vanessa, and the weight of his empire crashed back down on him. He couldn't be the man who hated the cage. He had to be the owner. She was just tending to the plants. "Vanessa," Mason said coldly, turning his back on Elizabeth to stare out the window. "She's leaving now." The betrayal was quiet, but it cut deep. He had relegated her back to the shadows to protect his image. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," Elizabeth whispered. He didn't answer. Elizabeth walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Mason's reflection in the glass. He wasn't looking at the merger documents. He was watching her fade away, his eyes filled with a desperate apology. But she realized then that touching a ghost only leaves you with cold hands. A week passed in silence. Elizabeth tried to stay invisible, telling herself that a billionaire's moment of vulnerability was just a glitch. But on Friday night, a summons came. Not from Mason, but from management. The penthouse needed urgent preparation for the merger press conference. Elizabeth had no choice. When the elevator doors opened, the penthouse was buzzing. Assistants scurried with tablets, and standing in the center of it all was Vanessa, directing the chaos like a queen. Elizabeth kept her head down, moving toward the corner where the peace lily stood. She gasped. The plant was gone. In its place stood a cold, abstract sculpture of twisted metal. It looked messy. A voice said from behind her. Elizabeth turned. Vanessa stood there, swirling a glass of champagne, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Mason prefers clean lines," she whispered, stepping into Elizabeth's personal space. "He doesn't have time for weeds, or for people who think they can fix him with a bandage." Elizabeth froze. Vanessa reached into her pristine white clutch and pulled out a crumpled piece of fabric. It was the handkerchief, stained with dried, rust-colored blood. "I found this in his desk drawer," Vanessa smirked, dangling the cloth like a piece of evidence. "Hidden away, like a love letter." Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. He had kept it. For a split second, hope flared. But a secret kept is a truth waiting to explode. Suddenly, the double doors to the office swung open. Mason walked out, flanked by 3 men in dark suits. He stopped dead when he saw Vanessa and Elizabeth standing together. The room went silent. Vanessa held up the bloodied cloth. "Mason, darling," she called out, her voice bright and artificial. "I was just telling this girl to dispose of this filth. You must have forgotten to throw it out after you cut yourself. It's disgusting." Mason's jaw tightened. He looked at the handkerchief, the symbol of the only kindness he had known in years, and then he looked at the board members watching him. He saw the trap. If he admitted he kept it, he looked weak and sentimental in front of the sharks. If he denied it, he would destroy the woman who saved him. He looked at Elizabeth's pleading eyes, begging him to be the man who hated the glass cage. But Mason Blackwood was afraid, and fear makes liars of us all. "Yes," Mason said, his voice dead flat. "It's just trash. Get rid of it." The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. He hadn't just dismissed the object, he had dismissed the moment. Vanessa dropped the handkerchief onto the floor at Elizabeth's feet. "You heard Mr. Blackwood. Clean it up, and then leave." Elizabeth stared at the cloth on the Persian rug. She fought back a hot tear of humiliation. She bent down, picking up the cloth that held his blood in her care. "I understand, sir," she whispered, her dignity shattered. She put the handkerchief in her pocket and walked toward the service elevator. She didn't run. She walked with the slow, agonizing gait of someone carrying a broken heart. Mason watched her go. He took a step forward, a silent scream building in his throat. But the board members were watching. So he stood still, encased in his armor. As the elevator doors closed, blocking her from his view, he realized the truth. He had kept his tower, but he had just sold his soul for a room with a view of nothing. The merger was a success. The headlines flashed in Times Square. Blackwood acquires Tokyo giant. Inside the penthouse, the air was thick with expensive cigars and victory. Vanessa stood by the window, basking in the adoration, a queen surveying her new kingdom. But Mason Blackwood wasn't celebrating. He stood in the center of the room, holding a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, staring at the twisted metal sculpture that replaced the peace lily. It was cold, sharp, lifeless, a perfect reflection of the man he was pretending to be. He looked down at the faint pink scar on his hand. The wound had healed, but the memory of calling her kindness trash burned his skin. He set the glass down. Without a word to Vanessa, without a nod to the board, Mason walked out. He didn't take the executive elevator. He took the service lift, pressing the button for the sub-basement. The doors opened into the humid air of the greenhouse. It was the building's lungs, hidden deep beneath the concrete. And there, kneeling on the floor, was Elizabeth. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was packing a cardboard box. Beside her, rescued from the dumpster, sat the bruised peace lily. "You shouldn't be here," Elizabeth said without turning around. Her voice was hollow. "The victory party is 96 floors up." Mason stepped into the light. "I couldn't breathe up there." Elizabeth stood up, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You seemed to breathe just fine when you called my kindness garbage. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't say it because I believed it." Mason's voice cracked, raw with the truth. He stepped closer, disregarding the dirt staining his Italian shoes. "I said it because if I admitted it had value, Vanessa would have destroyed it. And you. Elizabeth frowned. What? Mason whispered, the memory haunting his face. In my world, anything I love is a weakness my enemies will exploit. If I showed the board that a gardener's handkerchief mattered to me, they wouldn't just mock me. They would have fired you, blacklisted you. Vanessa would have made it her mission to ruin your life just to prove she could. He reached out, his hand trembling. I insulted you to make you invisible to them. I tried to make you worthless in their eyes so they would leave you alone. It was the only way I knew how to protect you. Elizabeth stared at him. He hadn't rejected her out of arrogance. He had rejected her out of fear. You protected my job, she said softly, but you broke my heart. Mason, you made me feel small. Mason dropped his gaze. I know, and I would trade every dollar of this merger to take back those words. I built this tower to be safe, but I just built a tomb. He looked at the battered plant on the floor. You saved it, he noted, a jagged hope rising. It didn't deserve to die just because it was inconvenient, Elizabeth said, picking up the pot, holding it between them like a bridge. Neither do I, Mason whispered. He looked up, eyes pleading. I don't want the sculpture. Elizabeth, I don't want the merger. I want to know if the monster can still be forgiven for bleeding. The silence was heavy. Elizabeth looked at the billionaire, begging for a second chance in the dirt. She shifted the plant to one arm and reached out. She didn't touch his face. She reached for his hand, the one with the scar, tracing the line with her thumb. The plant needs water, Mason, she said quietly, and it needs light. It can't survive in the dark anymore. Mason gripped her hand, as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling off the edge of the world. Then show me the light, he breathed. Show me the way out. Mason looked at his reflection in the darkened glass of the greenhouse window, a man in a tuxedo standing in the mud. He realized he had never looked more like himself. I can't go back up there, Mason said, his voice absolute. If I step back into that elevator, the man standing here with you dies. And I am tired of burying the best parts of myself. Elizabeth looked at him, searching for the fear. It was gone. If you walk away now, she warned gently, the walls will crumble. The board, the reputation, you will lose it all. Let them crumble, Mason replied. He reached up and undid his silk bow tie, letting it hang loose. Then he took off his platinum cufflinks, dropping them into his pocket like spare change. I built the walls to keep the pain out, Elizabeth, but I realized tonight that walls don't just keep out the hurt. They keep out the light. He reached down and took the heavy cardboard box from her hands. The billionaire was carrying the gardener's load. Show me the way out, Mason said. Not the executive exit. Your exit. They walked to the service doors, bypassing the gilded lobby entirely. They emerged into the cool, dark alley behind the tower. The air smelled of city grit and exhaust, but to Mason, it tasted like freedom. He took a deep breath, looking up at the skyscraper that bore his name. It looked like a needle stitching the sky, imposing and cold. But he was no longer inside it. You know they will come for you tomorrow, Elizabeth said as they walked toward the subway. The lawyers, the press, let them come. Mason smiled, and it wasn't the sharp smile of the Phantom of Wall Street. It was the soft smile of a man who was finally awake. They stopped at the subway entrance. Under the flickering fluorescent light, the class divide evaporated. My apartment is small. Mason, Elizabeth teased softly. There is no view of the skyline, and my plants take up most of the living room. It sounds perfect, Mason replied. He reached out, gently touching the leaf of the peace lily she held between them. I don't need a view of the world anymore, Elizabeth. I just need to be in it. He leaned in, and he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate rescue. It was a seal on a new contract, written not in leverage, but in trust. As they descended the stairs together, leaving the towering shadow of his legacy behind. Mason Blackwood finally understood the truth. He had built a fortress to keep the world out, never suspecting that it would take a gardener to show him that the only way to truly live is to let the walls fall down.